Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and together we're here in the Gospel of John. We're continuing on in chapter 9, very interesting section. Now, last time, in the last video that we did, we just dealt with the first 3 verses of chapter 9. We're going to read those again just to get started, but we broke that off and just treated that by itself because I wanted to look at and consider the causes of hardship and blindness and suffering and sickness and death and all of that. So if you're interested in that, go back and watch last week's video, John 9, 1 through 3, and I will, at this very moment, through the magic of editing, pop the thumbnail up for that. And if you're on YouTube, the link to that video is appearing at the top right at the same time. And I do ask you, mention YouTube, wherever you are, hit like for this video. Do it right now. Hit like or thumbs up, depending on which platform you're on. Leave a comment. These things cause the algorithms to promote this video. It shows that there is interest in this video. So hit the thumbs up, the like button, and leave a comment. It does make a difference. Besides the fact that I like to hear from you, but leaving comments in addition to thumbs up does make a difference. So let's read. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him." That's as far as we got last time. Interested in that? Go watch the video. Jesus continues, "I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." In this section, there are some really interesting things at play here, but one that goes overlooked, and I highlighted "sent me" for a reason. If you go back and read the last 2 chapters, chapter 7 and chapter 8, and look for every time that Jesus says directly that the Father sent him. He was sent by the Father. He says it in many different ways. Sometimes it's just directly. Other times he says it without using the word sent. Okay? This is a key theme here, and it plays into what Jesus is going to do, because we have these questions about the healing and how this happens. And, you know, the thumbnail for this video shows it very well, the mud on the eyes and going to the pool. Why? Why this way? There are lots of questions about that. Good question. But this sent is central to all of it, and we'll get to that in a moment, but I just wanted to plant the seed so that we're looking for it. In the beginning of the Gospel of John, in the prologue, when we went through that, we talked about the themes that John lays out there in the prologue of his gospel that are like threads that are woven through the fabric of the gospel. And we see that come up again here. And I don't think I've done a good enough job of emphasizing that, showing where those strings are, but I definitely want to do it tonight. Jesus says, "I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work." And day and night, we're talking about the theme of light and darkness. Light and darkness. It's a recurring theme in the gospel, and it's certainly a theme that was important to John, because in his epistles, 1, 2, and 3, especially 1, he talks about light and darkness repeatedly. It possibly is the major theme in his first epistle, which is the longest of the 3 by far. But day and night, you can only work during the day. You can't work during the night. And remember, historical setting here, they didn't have great big lights they could put up, so construction crews could work outside at night. That wasn't a possibility. You worked during the day, even within the house. At night, yes, there were lamps and things, but the light wasn't that good. So it was all about the daytime and not the night. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now, we want to look at this, and we talked about the prologue, so let's go look at John 1:5, and we'll start with 4. In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Now, you've been with me for chapter 7 and 8 and the multiple videos we did on that. Does not that sound like a description, a very poetic way of putting what we see happen there in the gospel later on? It's a great way of summing it up. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And we're going to see that as we work through this chapter, the balance of this chapter as well. John 1:9. That was the true light, which gives light to every man coming into the world. Picture is the world is dark, and the world is darkened with sin. And before Christ came, it was very dark. But he is the light of the world. And he is also, as it says in Isaiah, light to lighten the Gentiles. Chapter 3, verse 19, the light is, and this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. Evil hides in the dark. Evil doesn't want to be seen. It wants to do what it does, scurrying about in the darkness. When the light of truth shines upon evil, it flees. It runs for the hills. It doesn't want to be known for what it truly is. And then John 8:12, the big pronouncement, one of the I am statements. And then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Okay, we're going to stop there. But here, I want to point something out. And I'm not picking on the translation. I'm now using the New King James Version. I went back to that. Kind of circled back around to it 30 years later. I've always loved the New King James, but the denomination I was in used the NIV, and then I switched over to the ESV, and the ESV frustrates me in many, many different ways. So I finally went away from that, and the part of why I never pushed the New King James was for a while it wasn't readily available, but now you can go out on Amazon and buy the New King James Version. You can go on YouVersion, and it's there. And I like the translation much more than any of the rest. But here it says, I am the light of the world. And the statement of that in the Greek is right here. That's I, ego, eimi, to, phos, to, kosmou. The T-O here, and it looks like a T-O in English, and that's the equivalent of it in Greek, only that this is a short O, and this looks like a W is the long O. That is the direct article, the light, phos, as in photon, to kosmou, cosmos, world, to is the article there. I am the light of the world is what that says. Now, in John, getting back to our text here, as long as I am in the world, it says, I am the light of the world. And that sounds like it's the same thing. I am the light of the world, the light, direct article of the world. But it's not what it says. It's not what it says, actually. It's not a terrible translation. But what it says is, right place here, yes. It says, you notice, here's the same word. See, here it is here, phos. And here it is over here, phos. Over here, where it says phos, it doesn't have the direct article. It has it over here with the world, tu kosmou. Notice that's the same. And the best way to translate this is, I am a light in the world. And the big difference there is, as opposed to the direct article, and then we're having a Greek spasm here, and I apologize, but without the direct article, it focuses on the essence of what it is. I am light. And it's more for the world here. And I won't go into the reasons for that, why the tu kosmou is the same in both places, but here it's a little bit different in how it's translated. Trust me, because you don't want me to go into that deep of a Greek spasm. But I am a light. I am light in the world. I am light in the world. The essence of that. Not that he's the light. He's said that before, and he'll say it again. And it's said again. But he is light. He is that which enlightens. Without him, and we're thinking about going into the healing of this man born blind, without him, there is no vision. You can have 20/20 vision. Have you ever been spelunking? Deep, deep, deep down in a cave, and maybe in a tour in a big cave, and they shut all the lights off. And you just stand there for several minutes, and you realize you'd never seen darkness like that before. There is no light whatsoever. That's the contrast. With Christ, there is light. You can see, you can understand, you can comprehend. Think of what it is to learn and understand and comprehend without vision. It's a different thing altogether. A huge part of what you know and understand and how you know it and how you understand it has to do with vision. Vision. Without this light, without light, enlightenment given by the Lord himself, who is the light of the world, without that, you cannot see anything. He is the day. He provides the light so that we can see, so that we can work, we can see what needs to be done and see how to go about doing that. It's very important. It's very important. We need to spend time thinking about these terms that Jesus uses and the scriptures use again and again about him and what he was and who he was. And John laid the groundwork for this in a big way in the opening verses of this gospel. Without Jesus, you can't see. And you have experienced that reality in others. Perhaps you experienced it in your own life. If you're an adult convert to the faith, you know what it was like to not be able to see, to be blind. In those words of Amazing Grace, I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see, which, by the way, comes directly from this chapter. But this theme here, this truth here, is of profound significance. Now, we've got the blind man standing here, and you can bet he heard everything because he heard very well. Blind people do. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. He said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Now, This strikes about a 7 on the odd meter. But why this? Why this? Why does Jesus spit on the ground, make mud from the saliva, and put that on his eyes? There are several places where Jesus does things similar. There are other places where he does that. And one time in Mark 7:33 is talking about a man who was deaf, and he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers in his ears and spat and touched his tongue. He was deaf and mute, and he healed him that way. Again in Mark 8:33, so he took the blind man by the hand, different blind man, and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And in this instance, he gradually gets his vision. It takes a couple of moments. What is this about? With the mud, with the saliva, people run down all kinds of trails on this, of possible meaning. And I think that sometimes they run in directions that just don't really make any sense. You can, Jesus had magic saliva, or, who knows what. You can find all kinds of different allegorical interpretations of this. Here's the thing. Through this seemingly odd, and it is, act that he goes through, it makes it clear, because he's going to send the guy to the pool of Siloam to wash it off, that is what healed him. Jesus healed him. It makes that abundantly clear. It is also, you can see it, I think, as just all the more symbolic. If your eyes are caked with mud, and the guy had his eyes closed when Jesus did this. If your eyes are caked with mud and it kind of dries that way, you're not going to be able to see anything. It makes it obvious to everybody that you are blind. Now, interesting thing with this pool. Notice what the name of it is. Siloam. It can also be called Shiloh. Siloam, which translated means sent. Sent. There was in Jerusalem, in the old city of David, the Gihon spring, and Gihon means gushing. It was living water. Remember that discussion? Living water is water that flows. It's the best kind of water. But it was in one place in the city, in the old part of the city. And for people on the other side of the city to go there, we look at a map and it looks flat. Jerusalem is not flat. They had to go down and then way back up to get over to where the water was. So they had taken and cut a little channel whereby that water could go somewhere else. The water from where it gushed was sent to this other pool in this low place on the other side of town, on the other side of the city of Jerusalem. The water was sent there. Jesus sent the blind man there, and he had to go down in a half mile. It goes down 350 feet. He had to walk down there, stumbling along blind, and he was blind. But in faith, he goes and he does that. And he washed his eyes in the pool of Siloam, which is sent. And so he went and washed and came back seeing. You imagine what a joyous trip back up that hill that was when this man could see. But it's not an accident. Jesus could have sent him, he could have just said, go find some water, find a basin of water and wash your eyes. He didn't have to do this whole thing. He could have just healed him without touching him. He could have healed him without the mud and the saliva, but he did it this way because he wanted, after all of this exchange about who he was and from where he came, he wanted to send him to the pool called Sent, the one who was sent by the Father and was faithful in that. All he wanted to do was represent his Father as his Father wanted to be represented and be the way, the truth, and the life. He sent this man who in faith, being faithful, went and made that difficult journey and washed his eyes, and he came back seeing. And now all chaos is going to break loose because Jesus did a really nice thing. Jesus gave in a tangible way that we can all see and understand. He gave light in the darkness. This man had lived in darkness all his life. You imagine what he was doing walking back up that hill, up those steps. See, look, that's what this looks like. And he had to be reaching out and touching things. Oh, because he knew everything tactily. Touch it. And from hearing, this is what a crowd looks like. This is what people look like. This is what a sidewalk looks like, a path, a stone pathway. These are what steps look like. It had to he had to be in exaltation, just thrilled with all of this. But the reaction, now he's in the light, and he is in effect a point of light for everybody to see. The one who was sent from the Father sent this guy, and he healed his blindness. He took it away, and he gave light where there had been darkness. He gave day where there had been eternal night. But those who were in the dark are going to have a fit. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind, because beggars were out there, you know who they were. He's the guy who sits there. Is not this he who sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him. He just looks like him. He said, I am he. It's me. You got it right. Therefore, they said to him, how were your eyes opened? He answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received my sight. Something else I missed before, neglected to point out. Do you think this guy drew attention walking, stumbling through the crowd, finding his way down to the pool of Siloam, maybe needing to ask directions because it's not like he walked around the city all the time with mud caked on his eyes? Do you think that drew attention to what was going on? I would think so. That's kind of an odd sight. I think I would notice it. Then he said to them, where is he? He said, I do not know. They brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. And if this were the Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of thing, everybody would do boo and hiss now. Or maybe the serious music, dun, 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 dun. The Pharisees, they're the judges. They're the powers that be. They wielded authority, and everybody knew they didn't like Jesus. So they brought him to the Pharisees. Now it was the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Uh-oh. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. They asked, he told them. And that's, pay attention, because this goes on multiple times. Therefore, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Okay. There wasn't a rule that you couldn't do something good on the Sabbath, that you couldn't heal, that you couldn't save someone. You weren't supposed to work on the Sabbath. That's true. It was about focusing on the word, rest, focusing on rest because the Savior was going to come and give true rest for your souls. The Sabbath was all about Jesus. But apart from that, here's the thing. They literally had, apart from what it says in the Old Testament, apart from what it says in the Torah, first 5 books of the Bible, they had come up with a list of 617 things you couldn't do on the Sabbath. They had it down to how many steps you could take. It was just absurdity. It was all about them having power and authority and them being able to say to everyone else, see, we're better than you because we follow all of these rules. Those two things, being better and power and authority, while gutting the heart of God's word. because God desires compassion, mercy, not sacrifice. Do the former, forget, and you don't need the latter. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. So it sounds like there was a division among the Pharisees, because this is hard to get your mind around and understand this. There were some amazing miracles done in the Old Testament. Trivia question, who did the most miracles in the Old Testament? Not who you think it is, probably. And if you do, you can put it in the comments and say, I knew that. Which figure in the Old Testament performed the most miracles? It's Elisha, not Elijah. Elisha performed the most miracles in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, there are people brought back from the dead. Elijah did that. All kinds of amazing things. One thing that had never happened was that a man born blind was given his sight. That has never happened, and it did not happen. They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him? Because he opened your eyes. They're putting him on the spot. He said, he is a prophet. I mean, what else can you say? He is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he see? The guys there, the other people had brought him and said he was blind. Here's the thing. Think of people in the dark who don't want the light. They're going to cover up their eyes. They're going to put up their hands to keep the light from shining in their eyes. They're going to find every way to try to shut that light off possible. Why? Because they love the darkness rather than the light. John 1. That's who they are. That's who they are. They've always been those guys, and they have determined to keep being those guys. And we'll talk more about why in a minute. So they bring the parents in. His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son. And listen to how carefully they phrase this. We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes? We do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself. They weren't putting themselves on the spot, and we're going to find out why. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, he is of age. Ask him. He's an adult. He's a grown man. You ask him. But look at the degrees, the lengths to which they're going. If you confessed faith in Jesus, if you said, yeah, he's the Son of God, he's the Messiah, they would kick you out of the synagogue. Now, getting kicked out of church is one thing, right? It's a bummer if they kick you out of church. Hardship, embarrassment, whatever else. They say you're a heretic and they kick you out of church. I don't think that happens much anymore. But this was more than that. If you were ostracized and put out of the synagogue, you were a social pariah. People wouldn't do business with you. You were no longer kosher. They wouldn't fellowship with you. Life would become very, very, very difficult. So this was a big thing. They were putting serious pressure, not just on these parents and this man, who, by the way, they're going to kick out of the synagogue because he was healed. They're going to put pressure on the whole community. All the Jews, don't you dare believe in this guy or we'll kick you out. There is oftentimes a cost. There's always a cost of discipleship. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner. Why do they know he's a sinner? Because he does things on the Sabbath. That's their rationale. But bottom line, they're going to say he's a sinner no matter what because they don't like him. They don't want him there. He's come back and he's the son of the vineyard owner, and they know that the vineyard is going to be his, and they don't want him to have the vineyard. He answered and said, and this man, I want you to listen to the intelligence and just the wisdom. That's the word I want to use. The wisdom of this simple man who had never been educated. All he'd ever done was begged. That's all he could do. That's all he could do. They didn't have the Torah in Braille. He was just a beggar, the lowest rung of society. He answered and said, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. And that is exactly where John Newton got the line for the hymn. I once was blind, but now I see. Then they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? They're not going to accept it. Darkness, blindness. The man who was blind is trying to shed light on those who are in the dark, who think they're in the light, who think they are the light. And they're not going to listen. He said to them, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Think of that one. Can you imagine how that burned their ears? Then they reviled him and said, you are his disciples, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. We'll stop there and let's just talk about Moses' disciples. I'm going a little long here, but I can't help it. Moses' disciples, the way they look at Moses and being Moses' disciples, it's kind of like, I think the best analogy for our culture today is, it's like being a New York Yankees fan or an Atlanta Braves fan or a Green Bay Packers fan. Let's say you're a Green Bay Packers fan. You don't really care about Packers. You don't care. Those are just pretend people to you. What you care about is how it makes you feel when they win. You get to claim that. It's your bragging rights. And the reason you feel bad when they lose is because you got to go to the office, and the guys are going to rib you because your team got pounded over the weekend. They didn't love Moses. They just loved what being Moses' disciples did for them. It made them look good. Moses was the ultimate highest authority. This fellow, we don't even know where he's from. He's nobody. He's not in the big leagues. He's nothing. The man answered and said to them, and I love this, why, this is a marvelous thing that you do not know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. That's the blind guy, the uneducated beggar, presenting logic and theology, and they're just going to refuse it. Not going to have anything to do with it. And I looked at this verse before when we looked at verses 1 through 3 of this chapter. They're going to just impugn his character. They answered and said to him, you were completely born in sins, and are you teaching us? And they cast him out. That means they kicked him out of the synagogue. He's now ostracized. Okay? But this thing, if you were born blind, if you were born with a birth defect, sickly, whatever else, it was because of sin. That's the way they looked at it. And we dealt with that in the last video, so go watch it. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he found him, he said to him, do you believe in the Son of God? Right down to the brass tacks. He gets right to it. Do you believe in the Son of God? And in this, it should be man, Son of Man, as in Daniel 7, Son of Man, which Jesus calls himself all the time, Son of Man. But the King James had God, and so they kept it here in the New King James. He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I may believe him? And Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you. Then he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. Faith is as simple as that. Faith is as simple as that. It's knowing Jesus and trusting in Jesus. And Jesus said, this is where he kind of sums this whole thing up. For judgment I have come into the world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind. For judgment I have come into the world. Jesus is walking judgment. Your reaction to him, either positive or negative, and there are only the two, positive or negative, no neutral reaction to Jesus. That is judgment. That is judgment. Go read what it says in John 3:16 and following, what he says about those who reject him. Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, Are we blind also? Jesus said to them, If you were blind, you would have no sin, but now you say we see, therefore your sin remains. They claimed to be the ones who could see. They claimed to be the authorities on Scripture. They claimed to be the ones in the know, and yet they rejected him because in reality, apart from their claims and what they boasted of, they were blind. They were in darkness. All right. There's a lot more that we could say about this. There's just so much that is here, but profound themes, profound truths about blindness and seeing, about darkness and light. And there's this huge contrast between the profound faith of this simple, uneducated, peripheral member of society, not even a member, he's off on the side, and his profound faith and the wisdom that came with that in complete contradistinction to the abject rebellion, hatred, and unbelief of those who were the religious leaders. Thank you so much for joining in and watching. I encourage you, give that thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and if you knew it was Elisha, you make sure and tell me down below. This is Matthias 76. Together, we're decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.